Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Vanessa if you are new here. Now, summer has arrived and a lot of people take this time to exercise, lose some weight for their bikini bodies and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought that I wanted to post a video talking about some questions that arose in the past for myself or my friends have reached out to me about, and that is about the topic of yoga. Now, yoga is like a stretching exercise that includes meditation, and a lot of people engage in it because it helps with like physical therapy, it helps with relaxation. And so when people find out that the source of yoga or the origin of yoga, a lot of Christians wonder, can I perform yoga as a Christian because it has these origins? So in this video, we'll be discussing what the church says about it and whether or not you as a Christian can perform yoga. Now, the first thing we need to know is that the church does not have an official teaching on the act of yoga. The church doesn't say whether or not you can do it or whether you can't do it. But what we could do is take other church teachings and apply it to the topic of yoga as we assess whether or not we can engage in this act. So, if you are engaging in yoga or considering to engage in yoga, you need to consider why. Why am I doing yoga? If you're doing yoga simply for the physical exercise part of it, that you're not engaging in the origins, that you're disassociating yoga from its origins and from the movements and where they come from, then yoga in itself is not a sinful act because you're doing it in the form of exercise. However, if you are attributing yoga to its origin and you're going like, I'm doing this movement because of this origin, then that would make yoga sinful because then yoga would be a form of use of idolatry. So we need to make sure that we are not doing yoga in the form of its origin. But if we're doing it in the form of physical exercise to stretch for physical therapy, then yoga is not wrong if it's disassociated from its origin. However, some people claim that it is almost impossible to detach yoga from its origins or its meditation reasonings. And if that's the case, then I would suggest to not engage in yoga at all if you're unable to remove it from its source. Now, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith actually addressed this, so I'm going to read a very lengthy paragraph to you all so you can get an understanding of what the church talks about when it comes to meditation and its sources, and whether or not as Christians we should engage in meditation if its origin is kind of up in the air or it's pagan. So let me read it to you. The ever more frequent contact with other religions with their different styles and methods of prayers has in recent decades led many of the faithful to ask themselves what value non-Christian forms of meditation might have for Christians. Above all, the question concerns Eastern methods. Some people today turn to these methods for therapeutic reasons. The spiritual restlessness arising from a life subjected to the driving pace of a technologically advanced society also brings a certain number of Christians to seek in these methods of prayer a path to interior peace and psychic balance. The psychological aspect is not dealt with in the present letter, which instead emphasizes the theological and spiritual implications of the question. Other Christians caught up in the movement towards openness and exchanges between various religions and cultures are of the opinion that the prayer has much to gain from these methods. Observing that in recent times, many traditional methods of meditation, especially Christian ones, have fallen into disuse, they wonder whether it might now not be possible, by a new training in prayer, to enrich our heritage by incorporating what has until now been foreign to it. I know that was a fairly long reading, but hopefully it gave you some insight to what the church teaches. I'll have the document that I read from linked down below, so if you want to read it in its entirety, you guys can. So if one is engaging in yoga as just a form of exercise, apart from its origins, then yoga in itself is not a sinful act. But if one is engaging in yoga, taking full note of its origin and kind of incorporating its origin into the act of yoga, then they should not be doing yoga as a Christian. Now, there are other forms of physical exercise that one can partake in that do not have origin in pagan worship that one could consider doing instead of performing yoga if they must do those movements or do similar movements for physical therapy reasons. However, something having a origin that is kind of weird or could have been used by pagan worship does not necessarily mean that that act is wrong, as long as we disassociate it from its origin and we're doing it in a Christian way to glorify and worship God. There's some actions that people do that do have a kind of, like I said, weird origin, but since they are disassociated, we're able to act upon them without being connected to that origin. So we must be prudent in our judgment when doing things. One thing that I always do is I always assess and I think about when I'm doing anything about, is this glorifying God or is this going against God? And one thing that I do note is that if it feels like a sinful act, it is a sinful act, even if it's not inherently sinful. If I feel like I'm committing a sin by doing this thing and the church didn't write down it was a sin, but I feel like it's a sin, then I know that I'm doing something that is not glorifying or worshiping God. I'm doing something against God. So like, let's say I say like, oh, chocolate is sinful. I shouldn't be eating chocolate. Eating chocolate is sin, and when I eat chocolate, I'm going directly against God because that's how I feel. I will not engage in the act of eating chocolate because I recognize that it is a sin, even though it's not a sin. Hopefully I'm not confusing people. But do you see what I mean? Be prudent in your judgment. If it feels wrong, it probably is wrong, you know? So if you feel like you need to confess it at confession, you should probably confess it at confession, even if it's not considered a sin in nature. But long answer short, no, yoga in itself is not a sin if it's disassociated from its origin, but be prudent in the actions you do. And if it feels wrong, then don't do it. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and hopefully brought some insight about the topic of yoga. If you guys want to share your interpretation of these teachings, since the church does not have a definitive answer, let us know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you happen to like this video, please give it a like. And if you like me and want to see more of me, please hit the subscribe button and also turn on that bell notification so you're notified when I post. And I look forward to seeing you guys all in my next video. Bye-bye.